Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Community IT and Build Consulting webinar for May 2020 titled, What Do Nonprofits Need from Their Tech Leaders? Technology leaders at nonprofit organizations come in all sorts and job descriptions according to the resources and the needs of the organizations they serve. Some organizations have a CIO, others an IT director, and sometimes a finance, operations, administrative, or programs executive or manager takes on the technology leadership role. But what do nonprofits need from their tech leaders? Today we'll be describing the qualities Build Consulting believes are most important to being an effective technology leader and tell some stories about our experience with tech leaders in a variety of different nonprofit organizations. We had over 40 registrants for this webinar, with currently 6 attending live, and some questions submitted which we'll try to address over the course of this webinar. And we hope to leave a few minutes at the end for any questions you have. You'll also have access to our personal contact information for any follow-ups you would like to send our way. Before we get started today, just a few housekeeping notes. Please be sure to ask questions using the available questions feature in GoToWebinar. Avoid multitasking. You may just miss the best part of the presentation. And as always, webinar recording and slides will be available in a couple of different formats via email after the webinar. We also make the recording available as an MP3. A lot of our recordings lend themselves well to just listening and are good for just sort of bike rides, walks, commutes, etc. A couple of promos for some upcoming webinars we have. On Wednesday, June 17th, Community IT will be presenting a webinar called Remote Staff Office Staff Tech Tips for Nonprofits. You'll join Community IT CEO Johan Hammerstrom and some expert guests to discuss what works about remote working, what could be better, and what we can do to move forward thoughtfully as nonprofit offices reopen. And then in June, later in the month on the 24th, I will be presenting relationships and constituent journey mapping, which is to discuss the relationships our nonprofits have and how to document them with constituent journey maps. They have benefits in the areas of branding and marketing, operations, and information system requirements development and systems design. So be sure to check those out. We'll be promoting those on our websites and via email. Just a little bit about Community IT and Build Consulting. We both work exclusively with nonprofit organizations to help them make information technology and information systems decisions that support their mission. We have a collaborative approach, empowering our clients to make informed choices for their organizations. And here's a little bit more about Build Consulting's services. All of our services are designed to help clients transform themselves to better serve constituents of all types, including funders, donors, program beneficiaries, staff, volunteers, board and committee members, and the general public. My name is Peter Mirus, and for today's discussion, I'm the moderator, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, David Deal. Together, we have nearly 50 years of experience in nonprofit technology leadership and have worked with peers in that area across hundreds of nonprofit organizations. Over the course of my career, I've served as a technology leader on both a short and long-term basis under many job titles, including CIO, Senior Advisor for Strategic Projects, Digital Communications Director, and as the project leader for a broad range of initiatives ranging from 3 months to over 3 years in length. I've managed small teams at small organizations and teams as large as 100 members at organizations with over $2 billion in annual revenue. Across that time, I've learned a lot about what it means to be a good leader in general and technology projects specifically. And one of the things I've learned is that what's in your heart and between your ears is what matters, how you engage with those around you, and how you think. It isn't so much about specific technical knowledge, that's more readily available than ever. But the hardest things to develop and what requires the most self-awareness and introspection are the things I just mentioned. Over the course of the past 20 years, my approach to leadership has been shaped by many people and information sources. One of those people is the person that's with me today, David. David, would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Peter. I've had the pleasure of working with Peter for the last decade, including more closely for the past 5 years here at Build Consulting as two of the founding partners here at Build. My career has been in nonprofit technology since it began in the early 90s. For the first year of that time at a nonprofit, and since then as a consultant to nonprofits. I grew my first company, which was Community IT, to a team of 60 staff providing technology guidance and support to hundreds of nonprofits. In 2015, I left Community IT to co-found Build Consulting. And I had the opportunity from early in my career to serve as CEO. And in doing so, I learned a lot about leadership. I've learned in a lot of ways about leadership, including first and foremost my own mistakes, of which I've made plenty. Secondly, I learned from other leaders I hired who had leadership talents of their own. Thirdly, I have to give a shout out to a great executive coach, Whitney Walpole, who worked with me for over a decade. Fourth, I got to participate in a peer group of CEOs in something called Entrepreneurs Organization. Fifth, I've had the opportunity to serve on quite a few nonprofit boards and a corporate board over the years. And then lastly, from working closely with senior leadership at numerous nonprofits, both on technology projects and organizational change management, often related to tech projects, all of this has provided me the opportunity to observe leaders and to really observe what works.
Thanks, David. Build Consulting believes that tomorrow's best nonprofits will use technology to change themselves and the world. But our analysis of the industry statistics, combined with our own observation at hundreds of nonprofits across the sector, is that about 50% of nonprofit technology projects fail. And the reason we were founded is to address the fact that oftentimes when a technology change project is happening, the technology moves forward, but the organization does not. And this is a slide we often show to our clients to underscore this. OO plus NT equals EOO, which stands for old organization plus new technology equals expensive old organization. And it's just to highlight that transformation is critical to your success. And what does transformation entail? Well, we created this information strategy framework to help organizations consider the various aspects of their organization that will need to be transformed in order for the technology transformation to ultimately be successful. And those are from left to right: leadership and governance, operations, process, data, and technology. Yes, in organizational challenges with technology, sometimes there are technological problems themselves to be addressed, but studies have shown that about 50% of executives say that those problems are related more to people in the organization, and that speaks to that includes leadership, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. One of the most critical factors in technology success in nonprofit organizations is having an experienced and empowered technology leader with the right qualities to get you where you need to go. And as David and I are going to discuss with you today, a lot of those factors or qualities are not hard skills, but are more soft, what might be considered soft skills, indispensable qualities that a person must have on which they're building their business and technical knowledge. And in a nutshell, those things are ethical, strategic, process-minded, collaborative, adaptable, and servant leader. We're going to be talking about each of those things in turn, relating them to what we've seen in the nonprofit sector from technology leaders, both good and bad, in relationship to each of these things, and providing specific examples of how applying these things can help transform your work and your organization's work for the better. We're going to start with ethical. David, can you take the lead on this one?
Sure thing, Peter. This concept, like many of the concepts we're talking about in today's presentation, really applies to all leaders, not just tech leaders. We'll share examples that are specific to tech leaders, but realistically, it applies to leaders in general. So first of all, an important part of leading successfully is that people believe in you and judge that what you're doing is in the best interest of the organization, not just yourself. A clear commitment to the mission of the organization is especially important for all nonprofit leaders, including nonprofit tech leaders. And I think the idea of being an ethical leader is also related to characteristics like trustworthiness and integrity, and some of the specific behaviors that build trust and support integrity I wanted to call out. Number one Does a leader do what they say they're going to do? Are they willing to hold themselves to the same standard they hold others? The phrase "do as I say, not as I do" it doesn't work in parenting, as I can attest, and it also doesn't work in organizational leadership or in technology leadership. So if a leader says, the organization is going to use a CRM, are they using the CRM? Number two, in a leader's explanation of decisions, are they more guarded or are they transparent? If a leader's rationale for decisions is opaque, if it seems arbitrary, it's going to undermine trust. And then, thirdly, does a leader's decisions accrue primarily to their own benefit, or does it really benefit the entire organization? So, ethical leadership, integrity, trustworthiness, these are the things that are really the secret sauce that either support or undermine everything else a person does as a leader and everything else we're going to talk about today.
That's right. And we've seen technology leaders at some organizations, whether it be a CIO or a CFO or sometimes an IT director, that did serious damage to themselves, their teams and projects, and their organization through a variety of what we would consider at least to be unethical behaviors, including such things as making preferential deals with vendors to get favors for themselves, squashing others in the organization to make themselves look good or feed their own egos, take advantage of their systems access to spy on others, making mistakes and then throwing other people under the bus, as David alluded to, failing to make good on their promises or their commitments, promoting people that operated in bad faith while demoting or firing good actors, or even simply just taking on projects that they knew in advance that they weren't well equipped to deal with. And then in contrast, we've seen people in these roles behave in exemplary ways. They will refuse to be swayed by any favoritism from vendors. They'll act respectfully and generously towards others. They'll set clear boundaries for themselves and others regarding privacy and use of privileged access. They'll admit their errors and propose resolutions. And they help to promote positive cultures where good people are elevated and people that hurt the team are marginalized or let go. And so, as David said, this is true of any leadership role, that there are so many opportunities to either choose or not choose the good, and technology leaders no less so. So, as David said, this is a foundational characteristic that you just can't do without, and that's why we put it first in this lineup. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the quality of being strategic and what that means. And I'll give a little lead into this one and then defer to David for some other comments. So, one of the things that we've encountered often in the space is that a tech leader who feels like they need to be hands on or in the tactical weeds of administering the system or understanding the data model or even the code, they might not have the perspective necessary to understand what the business needs in order to use technology effectively. It's more important for a technology leader, we found, to be able to frame the right business questions for other leadership inside the organization, such as the opportunity for return on investment, risk versus reward, or understanding the value and process of change management.
And I look at strategic as both a competency that some people bring, but also a skill that can be learned. And I really think this is a key skill for a tech leader to develop. It's discerning what is a technical question and what is a business question. So, going back to the CRM example I briefly mentioned earlier, while the mechanics of configuring a CRM and supporting it fall squarely on the tech team and tech leaders, there are really some questions the tech leader needs to surface for organizational leadership, uh, for decision by leadership and communication to staff. Things like why the organization is deploying the CRM, what the envisioned use or expected use of that CRM is going to be, who is going to own various aspects of using it effectively. These are non-technical questions that tech leaders need to surface with business leadership before they can really do their technology job properly, which involves supporting the work that needs to get done and training staff effectively on its use. I think a related skill, closely related to bringing business questions to business leadership, is really helping those business leaders understand the trade offs. So every meaningful decision is going to involve trade-offs between money or resources and time and quality. I sometimes see tech leaders share too many technical details or explaining what technology can do without getting to the heart of the choices that senior leadership needs to make to be able to use that technology effectively. And a few typical trade offs are things like what to prioritize. A lot of times I'll see people try to add another major project to an already full slate of work without deprioritizing something else. So I think a tech leader has a responsibility to help others in senior leadership who are making decisions with them really understand the trade off between taking on something new and giving up something else when they do that. Secondly, I think security considerations, if you want to be more secure, in many cases, it's going to create either a little more inconvenience for end users or a little bit more cost for back end technology solutions. And then, in balancing costs, a lot of times the focus can be on direct costs. For example, if you want to reduce the spend on external support for your CRM, well, the indirect cost you're going to face is the cost of investing in internal capacity, number one, and again, deprioritizing something that those internal staff members are now, because they're now taking on new responsibilities, deprioritizing something else that they do. So there are kind of soft costs to those trade offs.
Mhm. And one of the things I like to talk about is being a planner, not a reactor, trying to be proactive, not reactive. And this includes realistically determining, as David said, what it'll take in terms of time and resources to get an organizations to its destination with data and technology projects. And I'd really just add to what David said that one of the big challenges for technology projects is time management. Oftentimes, nonprofit organizations sort of effectively treat their internal staff capacity as being infinite because they don't really keep track of where people are spending their time, and they don't really do a good job of estimating what initiatives are going to take from a time commitment standpoint. And so people get overtasked, and it's the responsibility of the tech leader to be strategic in thinking about this kinds of things and help the rest of the organization understand where lack of that kind of strategic planning is going to create a negative impact. David, did you have anything else you wanted to add on this topic?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I remember early in my career working as an engineer, solving server issues, being really hands on, while at the same time trying to move an organization's overall use of technology forward and trying to be strategic with technology. And really finding it challenging to do both of those well. And at smaller organizations where tech leaders are often, wearing many hats, it's difficult. But even at larger organizations, it's easy for a technology leader's job to tend toward putting out fires, solving problems as they come up, instead of carving out the space necessary to get ahead of things. And so, really, it requires creating mental space to be strategic, um, and I think that also requires space in the schedule. So I think it helps to block off time for doing this sort of creative thinking. And I'll say, even at one client I have that added a mid level technology leadership role, the person in this role quickly got wrapped up in putting out fires, doing system administration. Number one, because there were not enough other resources dedicated to doing those things. So, in part, it's the organization's responsibility. And number two, because I feel like this person derives satisfaction from solving problems, as many of us do. And so, I will say that it's both a responsibility of the organization as well as the individual technology leader to ensure that they're carving out enough time and space to be strategic.
Yeah, we often see challenges within organizations when a team member is asked to step into a strategic tech leadership role without prior experience in that role, and sometimes without the necessary mentorship or professional development support. So, this is just sort of a caution when you're elevating from within to make sure that somebody primarily with more tactical experience or management experiences is making a good transition into that strategic role. And so, In cases where that doesn't happen, you often end up with a person that struggles to make that transition and therefore is not able to establish the credibility to be taken seriously in the role. And we've seen this result in people within the organization sort of working around the tech leader in order to get things done because their perceived lack of effectiveness. So, but other organizations do well elevating from within if the right person is selected and the transition to performing in a more strategic way is planned and supported. And Build Consultants clients often ask us to help with the professional development of a talented person that they would like to see grow into that greater strategic leadership role. And that's a very enjoyable thing to do because it's a shared characteristic in our group that we love to learn things and teach them to other people. So it brings us a lot of joy and positive energy to help people make that transition and have the tools to flourish in their new roles. And when we act as part time or interim CIOs, we're often helping organizations define what good strategic tech leadership should look like in their organizations, and then help hire and onboard someone in a permanent staff role to serve the organization in that way moving forward. So, as David says, this is something that you can grow into, this sort of strategic mindset, and sometimes it just requires a little support to get you there. Now we're going to move on to talking about process minded. David?
When we talk about being process minded, we're speaking to the importance of technology leaders understanding what the organization is trying to do and the specific processes that business units need to execute. A successful tech leader needs enough technology experience to make informed technology decisions, but really, most importantly, should have a primary focus on what people or teams are trying to accomplish. The tech leader really needs to bring perspective and guidance on how to best use technology to do that work. To that end, one role we've somewhat commonly been recommending these days for nonprofits is a business analyst role. And that's because there's often a gap in communication and a gap in responsibilities between the technical team and the end users in finance, fundraising, operations programs. End users aren't necessarily clear on specifically how they're supposed to use the system to do their work. They often don't have standard operating procedures. Who has time for that anyway, right? And meanwhile, the tech team may have provided training, but that training often focuses on what a piece of software can do as opposed to how people are supposed to use that software to get their jobs done. So a business analyst can help to bridge that gap between software and business process and can build an organization's capacity for defining and following standard operating procedures and standard processes. So I really think a tech leader should have this process minded focus and should consider how a BA role, a business analyst role, is filled within their organization, whether that's a role they themselves need to play or whether they have the space to hire a team member or allocate a team member to focus on business analyst capabilities.
That's right. And this is a good opportunity to point out that technology leadership is often a shared effort, even if one person is primarily accountable for it. Sometimes the primary tech leader is the director of business systems that's charged with being the primary business analyst for the organization, and that's fine if they have the capacity to do that. But at other organizations, the primary tech leader might be a CFO or a COO, for example, and might not have the time to take on the business analyst role. And so they may hire a business analyst and share the leadership responsibilities in some sense. And in other cases, you might have a CTO that is great at infrastructure and help desk management, but lacking in business analysis capabilities. But whatever the scenario is in which you find yourself, it's the responsibility of the tech leader to either have that process minded viewpoint themselves or build and leverage that capacity elsewhere. And not just build it, but give it a voice and take advantage of the benefits that it provides. Now let's talk a little bit about what it means to be collaborative as a tech leader. It's very important that tech leaders be collaborative, particularly because research has shown that technology project leaders that employ a collaborative, iterative approach have a greatly increased chance of success in these projects. The iterative part of that equation is spoken to in our next important quality for a tech leader, which is adaptable. But in terms of collaborative, we expect that an effective nonprofit tech leader will have good relationships with other key stakeholders in the organization and lead in a manner that ensures that as the tech leader, they quote unquote take the journey with those stakeholders and arrive at the destination together. So, for technology leaders to be effective, they can't lead other departments from a distance in the front nor constantly be pushing them from behind. For systems to be effectively implemented, there needs to be a collaborative aspect, and all key stakeholders must be together in collaborative unity.
And Peter, I think another important characteristic of a collaborative leader is that they're open minded. They're willing to learn and be informed by others' experience. They're really about understanding what the organization, teams, and individuals need to do, finding solutions in partnership with others, and working collaboratively with their colleagues to use software effectively. So, yes, there's some teaching a tech leader often needs to do, but I really think there's just as much listening that a tech leader needs to engage in to understand what's needed and what's going to be valuable to someone else. So, it's really in that give and take, in that sharing and listening, that a tech leader and others can build mutual understanding and build alignment around what's needed so they're pulling in the same direction.
Yeah. I remember reading a research report way back in 2011 or 2012 now that indicated that the top priorities for nonprofit CIOs were the first top priority was delivering applications or systems fast enough to meet the business needs of the organization, and their lowest priority was having good or better relationships with leaders of other departments. And that's just antithetical to how we think about the tech leadership role in the nonprofit community. We think that there has to be that open-mindedness and that commitment to developing relationships, and as David said, learning and being informed by those other experiences. As an example, we have a client right now where we are rolling out a Salesforce communities-based product to over 11,000 users. It's a huge effort. And from the earliest stages for that effort, I would say technology leadership at that client has been very careful to solicit and incorporate stakeholder input for designing the constituent journeys and then performing collaborative reviews of the product through various design changes. They leveraged an internal cross-functional group of staff and a group of early adopters from different parts of the end user community of volunteers for this purpose. I think all in all, about 110 people were involved at some level. So this is an example of a large-scale collaborative effort. But it has been highly effective in making sure that the project met the needs of the community, the product met the needs of the community, and in building buy-in for the changes necessary to successfully implement that system across an 18-month phased rollout. And none of this could have been possible without taking a collaborative approach, nor would it have been possible without taking and maintaining an adaptive and approach and exhibiting a lot of adaptability in the course of administrating that effort.
So I think the adaptable characteristic really comes up because things change fast. Nonprofits are having to change quickly these days. Technology, of course, changes extremely quickly. And Peter, you mentioned the importance earlier of being iterative. I think that's extraordinarily important. And I have to say, when I'm working with a vendor, and I'm on the client side of the fence in these technology projects, and when we're working with a vendor who comes in with a waterfall approach to projects instead of an agile or iterative approach, I have to take a deep breath because a lot of times these projects are really large, and I find the waterfall approach really cumbersome. And I think the same applies when you're thinking about technology roadmaps. So the roadmap that painted a picture of what the next 2 or 3 years should look like for an organization needs to be responsive to emerging technology capabilities, to vendors not always delivering on promised capabilities, and even evolving business needs and opportunities. Things aren't always going to go the way you expect. And you need to be able to transition to alternate plans with positivity, with grace, in order to maintain the confidence and the engagement of the people with whom you work. So I think being adaptable is also about resilience, which is extraordinarily important during times like this. Technology priorities for many organizations changed significantly in response to COVID 19. If you were not already fully mobile and fully cloud based with good collaboration software in place, you really had to prioritize those things to make the transition to a virtual workforce. And you had to deprioritize other things to remain effective in a world where most of us are now in work from home mode.
A few minutes ago, I mentioned the effective tech project leaders employ a collaborative slash iterative approach. As David said, that's sometimes called an agile approach. Um, and a technology leader who isn't adaptable can't lead effectively in this style because they're not flexible enough to shift, as David said, to responding or changing or new requirement, to respond to changing or new requirements that will emerge during an agile process just by the nature of it. And I would just use as an example that at one client recently, I had a tech leader insist on doing, as David said, a more waterfall based approach. And they sort of did an upfront requirements gathering for a new system and then went into a separate space and spent about 12 to 18 months developing the solution and then brought the solution back to the organization. And after that period, this person met with a high level of resistance because the solution was no longer, and maybe never was, in touch with the needs of the organization. And this is no more to say that a tech leader who was not adaptable by nature or training did not take an effectively iterative, or for that matter, collaborative approach to solution design and development. And he did not have the adaptability to be truly responsive to the needs of the organization when confronted with this challenge. And ultimately, and this is somewhat of an extreme case, because of this incident, he ultimately needed to move on from that nonprofit and find another place of employment. So I would say that there's a finite quality to how adaptable and flexible you should be. I think good leaders and tech leaders included in that have constant principles that they apply that are rooted in best practices for both nonprofit business and technology. Again, so this is not to say that there shouldn't be a limit to the flexibility of a tech leader. But folks who are in that role who are not sufficiently adaptable for the reasons David and I outlined don't perform well for their organization, particularly in today's rapidly evolving landscape.
Yeah, and I'll just echo Peter that being adaptable and being principled, I do not see those as being in tension in any way. I think both are extremely important.
Yeah, yeah. The last
Speaking of
quality,
principles,
yep.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave. This is your
All right.
topic.
Speaking of principles, this one, servant leadership or being a servant leader, is one that's really important to me personally. And what it means, it's about a leader viewing their role as being in service to others, not about wielding power over others. It's about being a leader who doesn't need to be the center of attention, who doesn't need to get all the accolades. And a servant leader empowers others, puts them in positions to do what they do best. In the nonprofit sector, where our work is all about mission and impact, I believe a servant leadership approach appropriately puts the focus on the many people at an organization who are vital for achieving the work of the organization. And I was personally very heavily influenced in this perspective by the leadership team at one of the earliest nonprofits I had the privilege to work with in my career, so much so that I studied it, eventually even did a TEDx talk about it. And I really encourage people to explore servant leadership if they're not already familiar with it. And related to this concept of serving and empowering others, I think it's really important for a leader to be self aware about what they're good at and what they're not good at, because we all have our strengths and weaknesses. And understanding one's limitations really helps to inform who a tech leader needs to collaborate with, needs to surround themselves with to be effective. It's vital that leaders depend upon others who offer complementary skills and expertise, and that they support those people in succeeding.
Yeah, I consider David to be my servant leadership Sherpa. It's an approach, he's been dedicated to for a long time, even before I knew him, and we've known each other for, I think, 8 years now. So, I don't have a lot additional to offer on this point other than to say that servant leadership, I think, is more felt than heard. There are a lot of people that give lip service to the idea of servant leadership, but it isn't really an integrated aspect of how they function in the day-to-day. And in order for servant leadership to be effective, it has to come from who you are, not just from a set of tasks. And I do think that in order to effectively exhibit this quality to some degree is dependent on the environment that you're in. And I would say that when you don't have an empowered role within your organization, it actually makes it more difficult to be consistently exhibiting servant leadership qualities because you're not in a position to lead effectively. So you're not in a position to lead effectively in any way, and then it's difficult to really exhibit all of these qualities, but I think particularly the servant leader quality. So those are all of the formal talking points that we had for this presentation today, and hopefully we'll have some Q&A at the end, or we can just wrap up early. But before we get to the Q&A, I just want to flash this information up on your screen. There's a lot of information that we cover in these webinars, and there's a lot of opportunity for reflection after the fact. I know that some people also register with a plan of consuming the recordings later on. So if you didn't get an opportunity to ask a question that you wanted to ask during the course of this webinar, or if you're just viewing the recording after the fact, please know that we're available for you to reach out to us. Our email addresses and LinkedIn profiles, as well as the address of our website, are up on the screen here. We're happy to hear from you at any time. We're happy to engage in a quick chat back and forth via email or over the phone or a Zoom call to get some sense of what you're facing in terms of challenges and opportunities inside of your organization, and how we can maybe just provide you with a little insight or free consultation in that moment that will help you take an action for the benefit of your organization's mission. And with that, we can just go to Q&A, and I will give a few moments to see if we have any questions come in.
And I'm not sure if you mentioned this at the beginning, Peter. Sorry if I missed it, but I assume you'd want people to type the questions in the chat.
Yep, in the chat or in the questions feature.
Okay.
So we do have a comment from one of our participants, and they say, I think developing relationships with people throughout the org and at other orgs indeed is critical. Too many techies focus on only meeting the needs of their supervisor, which is important, but isn't the only thing that matters. I agree, and I think an aspect of, to just broaden out that idea a little bit, I think that understanding the relationships that the organization itself has with other constituent groups and thinking about those relationships and meeting the needs of those is important as well. So it's a good thing to be sort of holistically relationship focused in terms of the personal relationships that you maintain, and also the relationships that the organization has with other groups and individuals that are important to its mission success. David, do you want to chime in anything on that?
I just want to say those relationships are extremely important for, one, understanding what's going on throughout the organization, for hearing different perspectives, and two, through the process of collaboration, for coming to some alignment with other people about what's needed or what would be helpful. So 100% agree with the comment. Relationships are vital.
Thanks to Norman for putting forward that comment. We got another two more coming in. So here's a good one for you, David, because I don't want to answer it. How can budgets adapt to adaptable projects when they have to be fixed 18 months in advance of the project? That is a great question from David. David to David.
Well, you set me up there, didn't you, Peter? So, I think one thing that organizations have begun to do is quarterly refreshes of their budgets. So it's no longer only organized around an annual cycle, it's really organized around more of a quarterly cycle, because organizations realize that spend in different areas needs to change. It needs to evolve to meet current conditions. If you're in an organization that doesn't function that way, it's admittedly difficult to do. And so I think it's really important up front to set the expectations and to be clear about the assumptions that go into defining a certain budget for a project. No project ever goes exactly as it's planned up front. There's always going to be some curveballs. Um, and so I think it's really a combination uh, of those things and setting appropriate assumptions up front that factor into the cost that you're providing for that project. And at some point, if the budget is just fixed, then you have to take a more agile approach where you're prioritizing the requirements, the things that you need to create as part of that project, and just address the highest priority functionality first.
Yeah, I think that those are good points. One of the other things that I would suggest from a budgeting standpoint is that, just as a tip, is the less certain you are about what the requirements for the project are going to be, the higher the estimated budget amount should be. I know when I learned early on in my career that to try to measure the level of uncertainty associated with the project or the conditions under which the project might involve, and then take your best guess at the budget for the project and then multiply it by a factor that's related to your uncertainty. So it would be pretty common for me to say, take my best guess estimate of what a project might be based on, or what a whole department budget might be based on comparables that I had seen at previous clients of similar size and scope, and then really take a look at the individual efforts within that budget and apply what I might call a growth factor, where it seemed like there was less certainty around the scope of a thing, or if there was a chance that something might change. And part of that it's also about learning how to do some sort of risk assessment up front. And there are certain things that you can't plan for. We're experiencing a lot of that now. And so even the most adaptable or flexible budgeting process can be turned upside down by extreme events. But those are just some tips to help you think about the budgeting process and having
And
some
Peter,
adaptability or flexibility there.
your comment there made me think of one other thing, which is for a lot of projects, the larger the project, the more complex it is, the greater chance that some of the assumptions are going to be off, or you're going to discover something along the way that increases the cost. And so, uh, pretty commonly for enterprise implementations for large technology projects, I'll encourage at least a 25% contingency budget for things that you don't know and can't know up front, that are going to be discovered along the way and that are going to need attention and are going to require more time and more investment to address. So it's just another technique that gets at what you're talking about there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So thanks, David, for that question. We have a question from Tim. How can you educate other executives to not see technology as something separate from our other business and strategic efforts? David, I know you've been thinking about this a little bit lately due to a client need. Do you have anything that you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not something where there's a one-time example you can provide that's going to change someone's thinking about it. Uh, I think it's um, I think it's one about cultivating a relationship with the person or people you're trying to persuade, and two, I think it is engaging with them around that topic over time. And number three, I think it helps to reference, not just your own experience, but also others' experiences. So, maybe some of you can use some points from this webinar to support this point to leadership. Or, there are white papers out there, there are articles, there are trainings. There's a lot of information out there demonstrating that organizations that think about technology strategically get much better results than organizations that look at technology as a cost center. And I would argue that almost all nonprofits these days in the modern era here need to be thinking about technology as a strategic advantage, not just a cost center.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I will also say, Tim, that one of the things that I like to start with when I'm working with clients and trying to build that level of sort of integrated thinking for technology and business is I encourage them to think about the different groups that their organization has relationships with and what is necessary to support those relationships or mature or develop those relationships over a period of time. Sometimes this is called constituent journey mapping, and as I alluded to earlier, I'll be doing a webinar about that next month. But the reason why I start with that is because it really helps when organizations as a whole, particularly executive leadership, are thinking about technology and data in terms of relationships. Like technology is a supportive thing. You have relationships. There are certain processes that take place within those relationships in order for the organization to fulfill its mission. There's data that's input and output as a part of that, and then technology comes in behind that. And technology has to be tied not just notionally, but in very concrete ways to supporting those relationships. So I find that conversations about technology, where technology has been in a separate bucket or idea previously, can be unified to business strategy in that way. But again, it's a time thing, as David said. It's something that has to take place over a period of time, and it's kind of something as well where sometimes you can get your peers within the organization can be just tired of hearing you beat the drum constantly. So sometimes it's necessary to at least temporarily insert a new voice or a new perspective, whether that be in a half-day workshop with somebody that can speak to these things or and over a couple of sessions. And so sometimes that can be effective as well. Hope that was at
I'll,
least, yeah, go ahead, David.
yeah, I'll just add one more strategy here, which I think is uh, trying to understand what is it that that leader or those leaders typically ask for in the way of information. What is it that they want to understand about how the organization is performing? And the more that you can answer those questions through technology, through a dashboard, for example, through a regular report, the more it really brings home to them, like, here's the way this technology is providing value to me. Here's the way this technology is strategic for me and not just something that I'm spending money on. So, for the benefit of others in the organization.
Yep. Thanks, Tim, for your question. And again, feel free to reach out to us for follow-up if you have any needs that or you want to discuss any of that further. Larry says, I'm in a relatively small organization and am the only tech resource responsible for balancing strategy and tech implementation. Stratechery. I added that. And I'd like to grow and improve my strategic and business thinking. Do you have recommendations for books or online courses to learn and improve in this area? I mean, Larry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the blog and learning sections of the Build Consulting website. So you can go to buildconsulting.com and check those out. We have a lot of good resources there, whether it's thinking about specific technical decisions for your organization, or change management considerations, a wide variety of strategic and also to some level tactical sets of resources that you can review. I often like to refer clients to the recent presentation that we did on how to build a technology roadmap for your organization, because that includes a lot of strategic planning tools and techniques in a very compressed short period of time. So that's very helpful, as well as the recent change management webinar. I think it's called Change Management for Changing Times, that really helps to think about technology change efforts in a strategic and planful way for inside of your organization. And David, do you have any other ideas for Larry?
I have ideas. I don't have specific resources to recommend here, but I will say that number one, a lot of what I've learned about leadership has come in relationship with other people and in trying things and in trying to model kind of learning from my own mistakes and learning from my successes and learning from my team's failures and successes. So a lot of it comes through relationship, or has for me. The second thing I'll say is I really have I do a lot of reading of how do other CIOs think about technology strategy? So I find that it's helpful just to get different CIOs' perspectives on how they think about it, and then that broadens my ability to employ different ideas that may be appropriate at different times. I think the third thing I'd say is that project management itself is an important discipline to learn because it's all about being proactive, which is a really uh, important skill for a leader to develop. So CIO readings, project management trainings, and reading about project management practices, and all of those things, I think, help to build up skills that support a person in being a better tech leader.
Mm-hmm. And finally, I'll just mention again another resource from our website. There is an article, I think, called What Makes Nonprofit Tech Projects Successful? And there's also a webinar that's related to that, and that really steps through the research-based determinations as to what are the most critical factors in technology project success and how to learn and develop those skills for your organization to make sure that those projects do achieve the intended business benefit. So that could be good for your formation as well. Um, Larry had asked a follow-up question as well. Do we have a blog post or white paper with a list of tasks or projects that the tech department should undertake every month, quarter, or year, etc.? I do not believe that we do. Community IT may have this in their resources on their website. As I said, we have the How to Build a Tech Roadmap presentation on the Build Consulting website and related materials. And I would say that that is equally applicable on a per department basis as it is on a project basis. So you can think of it in terms of planning for a project, for an initiative, for a system implementation, etc. So we would go through a very similar process, say, for doing a whole organization assessment as we would for just an assessment that was CRM focused or focused on departments that are the heaviest users of an ERP system, for example. So that is the answer to that question, and I know there are resources like that as well online that you can search for. We should consider doing an article or a webinar about that sometime, maybe in collaboration with Community IT. I know that we certainly have done it for clients to sort of outline what are the things that they should be doing on a regular basis at certain intervals, whether it's related to planning or budgeting or security or checking the roadmaps for products that are currently used by the organization, things of that nature. So.
And I'm going to give one really specific tip for you as a tech leader at your organization, which is just make sure you block out a little time on your calendar each week, each month to think proactively, to think strategically about things, and to consider, what are the things that we should be doing that we're not, and also what are the things we're doing that we can maybe stop doing because we have more important things to focus on.
Yeah, and I'll just, as a quick additional follow-up to what David and I just said, I had mentioned looking at roadmaps for and release schedules for products that you're currently using. I do think it's important to look at that on a quarterly basis at least, because especially for the platforms that we use, thinking of your Office 365s, your G Suites, your Salesforces, etc. There's going to be a lot of change that comes to you on the biddiness, so to speak, not change that you're in a position to dictate when you're on the receiving end of it. And that could be a wide range of minor and major system changes and feature evolutions. So one of the things that I find most helpful for my role in doing this for Build Consulting internally is occasionally quarterly basis looking at the roadmaps for the major systems that we use and kind of calling out for people what's currently happening and what's coming up and what are these and how it relates to needs that they might have or how it's something maybe that's more pertinent to serving our clients than it is for our internal use, making distinctions like that. So that's an increasingly large part of sort of IT management, is being aware of what's coming to you in system releases, whether you like it or not. Tim, thanks for your follow-up comment. Yeah, looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks. And there's no more questions, and we've got, we can just wrap it up 5 minutes early. I want to thank everybody who participated today and really enjoyed spending this time with you. Again, as I said before, don't hesitate to follow up with either David or I or both of us if you have any follow-up questions. I'm just going to put our information up on screen one more time. Also, you can, as I said, reach out to us through the buildconsulting.com website. Just go to buildconsulting.com/contact and you'll be able to shoot us a message through there. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.